Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
All right, Purple Daily on draft every Monday on the Purple Daily YouTube channel. Miles Gorham, Tyler Forness, Declan Goff here to break things down from a draft perspective. 52 weeks, once a week every year. Not once a week. Weekly podcast right here on the Purple Daily YouTube channel. And it's like 52 weeks out of the year, I guess. So I kind of said it right, but I butchered it too. That's okay. Doesn't matter because the Vikings are winning games. They're not butchering anything after we thought this season was going to go completely off the rails. It doesn't. Vikings win again. They win their fifth straight game against the New Orleans Saints. And I want to start here because Mackie dropped a great hot take on our Hot Take edition on Monday morning, fellas, that if a defensive coordinator or any coordinator could win NFL Coach of the Year, it actually should be Brian Flores for what he's been able to do with this defense. It's been phenomenal to watch. And we've talked a lot about what they want to do here on the defensive edge kind of strategy because you have a lot of pending free agents. I mean, Danielle Hunter's having a great season, but they have to figure out a way to get him a new deal. Marcus Davenport can't stay on the field, and I don't know. I'm not really ready to commit to a guy who can't even stay on the field. And then guys like DJ Wonnum, who's actually flashed and had pretty big success this year with Flores, also got to figure out what you want to do here. So, Forno, what should the Vikings do with a big hole at a very important position? And should they be looking to kind of fill that need immediately in the draft? Do you want to keep these guys internal, or at least one of them? What would you be looking to do in for the Vikings side so they can keep some of these edge rushers under contract for future seasons?
I think you have to start with Hunter, and you got to lock him down long term. Whatever that may look like, he's going to want market value money, and how you determine what market value money is, I think, is very intriguing. For the sole fact that he is 29 years old and he's going to be signing a third contract. Third contracts for edge rushers have not been very fruitful. The last couple edge rushers that have signed that third contract, you had Von Miller. It was a 6-year, $120 million deal, but that essentially is a 3-year deal worth less than 60. And Chandler Jones, before he was released after his escapades on social media and dealing with his own issues, 3 years, 51. And then Zadarius Smith, he was dealing with some injury stuff with that back. He signed a 3-year, $42 million deal, and we know how that looked like. It wasn't a 3-year, $42 million deal. It was essentially about 2 years, $20 million, with a lot on the back end. And is Hunter really going to be able to get that big boy contract, being that it is the third contract? He's about to enter his 10th season. So there's a lot of integral things that a front office is going to have to consider, even though he's 29 years old. Going into his 10th season, that's still a significant amount of wear and tear on an NFL body, especially when you talk about playing in the trenches. I think that deal will probably end up around $22, $23 million a year if I had to guess right now. Before the season, I thought it would be 19 a year, 3 years, 57, with the majority of that guaranteed. But you can't discredit the fact that his first contract that he signed after his rookie deal was atrocious. And the Vikings ended up paying about 14% more of what that initial contract was worth because, $14 million more because of all the extra things that they added onto it. I think you have to try and re-sign him. I think you also need to try and re-sign Davenport. And it's a tricky situation, as you mentioned, Declan, because he's had injuries to both ankles. It wasn't an ankle injury, and then he re-injured the same one. Kevin O'Connell said today he had a tightrope surgery on that latest high ankle sprain, which is about a 4 to 6 week recovery time. Brock Bowers for Georgia just returned after 4 weeks. So it's something that you can see some progress, but it sounds like that they're not going to expect him till later in the year. It is worth noting he did not say when Davenport had that surgery. So that part we don't know. That's in flux. But with those injuries, you could argue that, hey, come back on a prove a year. We'll give you heavy incentives and keep that cap hit low. Plus, then you also keep the cap hit lower because of what the dead cap is. And then you got to try and find guys in the draft. And if you don't go quarterback in the draft, you got to go edge early or defensive line. You have to get impact guys. And I'd argue defensive line is more important than edge for this defense because of how you need to be able to man up and you need to be able to open things up for the linebackers to penetrate, especially in the running game, and how Brian Flores likes to blitz. And Jerzon Newton, I think from Illinois, if he's available, I think you jump on him because you could use him like a Davenport, put him inside, put him outside, have his hand in there to have him stand up. He's a 310-pound guy who moves like a guy like Danielle Hunter, like a true edge. It's just nutty stuff. And I think you just have to focus on those positions and kind of see where to go from there. Everything has to be fluid. And once you kind of get into the weeds of the offseason, have a plan, get Hunter, and then build around that.
I like it. I see on the mock draft here too that from the 33rd team, I should say, this is a mock draft that released yesterday. So the Vikings would go 21st. It actually would take Michael Penix Jr. in this mock. However, put a pin in that for now. The pick before it is Dallas Turner from Bama. Now, Dallas Turner, I believe, was in some headlines over the weekend because people thought he was trying to take out Jayden Daniels. And also, another spoiler alert, we will talk about Jayden Daniels later on in this podcast. But Dallas Turner, would that do anything for you, Miles, as an outside linebacker edge guy, that if the Vikings are flirting around that like 18 to 22nd spot, is that a guy you'd like to see the Vikings take a chance on, or would you rather probably look at something else that would be on the board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, quarterback's always, for me right now, is always going to be like the 1A. Like, no matter what they do, I think that should be the like top priority. But of course, like, a lot of things can change, a lot of things can happen. And if that doesn't happen, I have no issues with going edge rusher. They haven't taken an interior lineman, an edge rusher, like a D lineman or an edge rusher in the first 2 rounds since we've talked about this before, but it was like essentially Sharif Floyd was the last interior D lineman, but edge rusher wise, basically it was Jared Allen when you sent the pick for him. So basically, like, it'd be nice to kind of invest heavily in that position at some point. Like, I think I'm with you on Forno. Like, with Forno, I think we should definitely be trying to extend Danielle Hunter, especially if the idea is to move off Kirk Cousins. We'll see like the rest of the season with Josh Dobbs, but I think like it just frees up even more money to make sure you solidify that, like, those important positions on defense, like edge rusher. With Hunter, you need some interior D-line help as well. But I think going after a guy like Dallas Turner would be a great fit if you can't make a move at quarterback, or even like we talked about, like interior line, D-line with like Newton from Illinois.
Would you guys bring back DJ Wonnum? Like, he's having a really good season. I know, Forno, you've been critical of him before. I think even...
we all have.
Everyone has. Rightfully has. Not even just singling out Forno. Everyone's been a little critical of DJ Wonnum, and rightfully so, but he's having a great year with Brian Flores. Forno, is that someone you could realistically bring back, or do you just kind of cut your losses there and try to just replace that position in-house with someone else?
It's a complicated answer because what's the price? And I think that's what it boils down to. A guy like DJ Wonnum with... You know what? He deserves a lot of credit. The last few weeks, he's put together some really nice games, and he's put together some really nice wins. That sack on Derek Carr, he just straight up beat Andrus Peat. And that was a really, really impressive rep, and he's had a few of those. But with edge rusher being such a premium position and him hitting the free agent market, what's the price? And it's the same conversation we've been having with KJ Osborne. The price is probably just too high to bring them back. And I think DJ Wonnum might end up pricing himself out of Minnesota, not because he's worth it, not because he's like, it would be a good deal. You just have salary cap constraints. And I think Wonnum just may end up becoming too expensive. People get overpaid on the market because, like, if all three of us are GMs, we all want one guy, that his market value may be 15 million, but he gets 18 because we keep bidding against each other. And that's how guys like Christian Kirk get paid $18 million a year, average annual value. Probably isn't worth that. Probably worth closer to 15, but he gets more because of the demand. And at a premium position, Wonnum could end up benefiting in his pocketbook because of that demand. And I fear that the Vikings just may not be able to make it work. And even if you can make it work, is he going to be worth the money that you're going to have to pay him? And those are the conversations you have to have right now. Great deal. He's making less than $3 million a year on the salary cap. But if you have to pay him 10 or 12, are you going to get the requisite production you need to justify that contract? I don't have the answer for that, but I'd lean no, because what we've seen lately has been more of an outlier in terms of what Wonnum has given us throughout the course of his career. But it's also fair to say, hey, he's growing, and it's okay that his best tape is at the latter end of that run. It's just something you're going to have to parse out and figure out if you're the Minnesota Vikings.
So also Jaquan Roy has mixed in a little bit here. Now, he's played some snaps yesterday, just 8 defensive snaps. He plays special teams as well, but he played 12 against the Packers. He played 17 against the Panthers when Davenport, I believe, was mixing in there too. So I wonder if Jaquan Roy is someone too that can maybe be that insurance policy, right? That like takes the next step. and someone that maybe replaces him. I mean, Miles, I know he's only played limited snaps, but have you liked what you've seen from him? He was a 5th-round pick by the Vikings, obviously, this past year. Have you liked what you've seen from Jaquan Roy? 6'3" and 305 pounds, too, by the way.
Yeah, I liked Roy coming out, and I know like a year before he was touted as like going into the season last year, the college season last year, he was touted as like a potential 1st-round pick. Obviously, a lot of things changed in that matter of time, and he became a 5th-round pick. But I liked what I've seen. I liked him in training camp. I liked him in preseason. I think he's a guy that could mix in. Now he's an interior D lineman, so more think nose tackle, defensive end. He's like that bigger type of body. But I think there's, like, you saw him move last week against the Falcons where he beat, I can't remember if it was the guard or the center, to make a tackle for loss in the red zone. And I think those types of moves, it was a nice swim move, quick off the ball, and got in the backfield and made a play. Like, he's got some of that juice to him. It's just about consistency. I think it's just about, and maybe it's about gap integrity too. Like, maybe why is he not seeing more snaps? But also you have guys like Bullard and Phillips who are playing well. So it's hard to kind of find time for these guys when you have other guys that are playing maybe above where they should be. And a guy like Jonathan Bullard, who's kind of stepped up even more this year than he did even last year. So hard to find snaps for young guys when the veterans are playing well. But I think Roy's one of those guys that could fill in a long-term for like a Jonathan Bullard, even potentially a Harrison Phillips, depending on what the plan is with him. But yeah, I liked what I've seen so far. Like, it's a small sample size, but as a rookie, like, you just want to see guys develop and kind of see how they progress consistently. And I got no problem with like him maybe being in the plans to be like a rotational starter, spot starter, or even a guy that like takes on even a larger role if he continues to develop.
How much of a badass has Josh Metellus been in this defense too? I mean, Brian Flores just uses this dude all over the dang place. So he's rushing the quarterback, he's dropping back, he's making tackles, like he's just doing everything. I mean, how come it took Brian Flores to realize the Vikings basically had this like insane Swiss Army knife in their back pocket that they could deploy at all types of angles?
It's a complicated answer because of what they wanted to play last year. Like, they didn't even let Harrison Smith do those kind of things. Harrison Smith was go play coverage, and that's not utilizing him to the best of his abilities. Sometimes it just takes somebody who's willing to think more outside the box and do some of those unique things to put a guy in those positions. And like, even if he can do those things, if your defense doesn't allow for that, why are you going to let him do those things? Like, and I will say, like, Metellus, the lack of linebackers, I think, has really helped him be able to step into that role, because the linebacker room as a whole isn't great. Like, you have Jordan Hicks, who unfortunately developed compartment syndrome in his shin and is in the hospital right now. All the best wishes to him. And you have Ivan Pace Jr., who is a UDFA, and theoretically a UDFA should not play, but he's played really good football. Brian Asamoah got hurt and has missed a significant portion of the season the last 3 weeks and hasn't gotten much run. And then Troy Dye's just a special teams guy. So you just have a lack of depth there, but you have a bunch of safeties that are really good. So, okay, how can we maximize this? And you have a guy who's really smart like Metellus, who's a special teams maven, and you make it work. And I think a creative mind is why you do that. And Metellus, like, if Harrison Smith is done after this year with the Minnesota Vikings, I think that leaves another really intriguing element, because now you have Metellus who can kind of slide into that role. And with all these safeties playing well, like, even if Lewis Cine was practicing well, like, are you going to put him into the game over any of these guys? And this isn't a defense of the Cine pick or anything. It's just reality. Mm-hmm. Even if Cine was practicing well, draft capital at a certain point just does not matter. If you're playing well, you're going to get to play. And this is a meritocracy. And Brian Flores has really treated it that way as you kind of watch the snap counts of this team and how guys have been performing. Like, we have 3 really good safeties and arguably the best safety room in the National Football League. And Metellus has been a really big part of that. And kudos to Flores for identifying that. And they got a hell of a deal. If he keeps playing like this, that contract's going to look real good in 2 years.
It's true too. Fellas, you want to go to the offensive side of the ball here? I think we can kind of get into this premature talker to a degree. So Josh Dobbs is playing out of his mind. 2 back-to-back games here where he's played really, really well. He obviously the bigger story coming off the bench 2 weeks ago against the Falcons, but then He even balls out yesterday against a really good Saints defense. I think people probably maybe didn't realize how good that Saints defense is, at least on paper. And Josh Dobbs puts up another absurd stat line, runs all over the pace. I know things in the second half got a little murky there, play calling and execution to a degree. But regardless, the dude is continuing to play well. What type of insane premature contract would you be looking, Miles, potentially give this guy? Like, will you be willing to give him like Geno Smith type money, where this guy comes off the street or comes out of the grave to a degree and then balls out with Seattle and gets a new deal? What type of like premature or even like incentive laden contract would you be willing to maybe give Josh Dobbs if the Vikings do want to re-sign him?
It's so early. So like the Geno one's obviously like premature in the sense that like Geno got like mid-level starter money and with incentives to become closer to like the, like Derek Carr type deals. So I think it'd be too premature for that. But I think like you look at like a Jordan Love, like what his extension was with the Packers, I think in that like $15-20 million per range. I mean, for a low end starter, I think it'd be right now kind of a fair deal for Dobbs, who hasn't made a lot of money in his career. And he's kind of proven that he can potentially be like a spot starter, like low end, mid tier starter at to a degree. And so I think, again, it's so hard to like think that far ahead with it being so premature. But I think what he's shown is within the Kevin O'Connell offense is that you can functionally build a strong offense around him with the weapons you do have and the kind of system you have in place. And I think Dobbs is the perfect type of like prototype of what I think they might be looking for in the future quarterback. A guy who's got a good arm, nothing like not like an elite level talent arm, but I think he's also got a plus athleticism. Like he's a guy that we've seen escape, outrun DBs. He's that touchdown. He beat Alontae Taylor to the edge. Like that's a DB. I mean, your quarterback can beat him to the edge for a touchdown. Like that's not really like a normal thing most quarterbacks do. Like you see guys like Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray do that type of stuff. So I'm not considering Dobbs that level, but like he's a really good plus athlete. And I think with that, it allows you to be more multiple. And I think that's just been really impressive the last 2 weeks of what they've been able to do with his offense. And I think I'm excited to see how they continue to build off it. But money-wise, I mean, it'd be like a short-term deal, like a 2-year, maybe we look at like let's say $35 million type deal with like some incentives in there. I don't know. Like it'd be really hard to kind of gauge what that looks like. But I think the one thing Dobbs has done is he's clearly shown that he's going to get a raise. And I think the Vikings did that with Case Keenum in 2017, where, that guy kind of came out of nowhere and was making like $2 million. And then all of a sudden he got like 3 years, $60 million type deal or whatever it was with the Broncos. So like Dobbs is getting to the point where he's playing himself into a lot more money than anybody would have anticipated before the season.
Forno, how much do you have to weigh turning in that glass slipper, kind of like what the Vikings had to do with Case Keenum, or Case Keenum really giving the glass slipper back to them with how he played? But how much do you have to weigh, like, are you riding just a like summer fling here, or is there a legit compatibility here where you can actually bring back Josh Dobbs under contract? I guess, what do you need to see for you to like really buy into the fact that the Vikings should extend Josh Dobbs, and what type of money, what type of term would you be willing to give him?
I'll be honest, I'm not willing to have the conversation right now because the data set is 1,000,000% incomplete. We have essentially 7 quarters of football in this offense where he's not even comfortable with his teammates. Look, the results so far have been really good, but we've also seen guys who have had like flashes in the pan and then get big contracts and do nothing. Scott Mitchell, the Detroit Lions in the mid 90s, he replaces Dan Marino after Marino breaks his foot, plays really well, gets a massive contract with the Lions, and then stinks. Bobby Hoying with the Eagles, he comes in as a third string guy, played at Ohio State, plays really well for a few games, then gets traded to Arizona for a decent haul and completely stinks. Like, these are the kind of things that you have to be cognizant of when you're talking about a guy like Josh Dobbs. And it's not to say he can or he can't or he won't. We just don't know. The data set is too incomplete, in my opinion, to be having the conversation. I think in about 3-4 weeks, we're going to have a better understanding of what Dobbs is in this offense, what he could potentially be long-term. But then we also have to think of the Case Keenum thing, where Keenum led this team to 13 wins and a berth in the NFC Championship game, including arguably the greatest moment in NFL history with the Minneapolis Miracle. And then he goes to Denver and stinks. And he's been a journeyman backup again ever since. So we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to understand that this could be just a special time and it could be completely over because he was on 5 teams in 12 months. And is that a mistake or is that just reality? And that's what Josh Dobbs is when you project out his future. I'm just not willing to have any kind of conversation about a contract until we have a more complete data set. And then once we do, I think it gets really interesting because you give him Geno Smith money because Geno Smith was viewed as a potential franchise quarterback. And then IK McPauley sucker punched him in the Jets locker room. Fitzpatrick takes over and Geno Smith kind of becomes a vagabond for a little bit until he wins the Seattle job and takes over last season. So what is he? I have no clue. And I don't think anybody can really speak to anything other than that because even in a great game yesterday, there were some issues, especially with ball placement. And we need to just give him time and really see what the complete picture is before we have real contract discussions.
I do think real quick, Declan, I think one thing though with that is I think if the Vikings were to bring Josh Dobbs back, again, we won't know what that number would look like at this stage. But I think the one thing I can feel confident, at least right now, is that they still probably look to go get a young quarterback, like a rookie quarterback in the first round, potentially, maybe second, day 2. But I think they'd still look to do that because I think the plan all along is to make sure that they're like setting up a young guy for success long term.
Well, let's go into this right now. Then we may as well. Jayden Daniels falls out for LSU over the weekend. We've gotten a lot of feedback questions, by the way, on this pod asking about him, and he even it looks like a cheat code out there. I mean, to a degree, a lot of Josh Dobbs, traits. He can run around a little bit. He can throw the football around. Is there a world that you would appreciate Josh Dobbs as, kind of this stopgap filler man option, and you draft Jayden Daniels? Like, would you sign up, I guess, Forno, for 2024 with Josh Dobbs as your starter and Jayden Daniels in the wings? Or would you rather take door B and whatever that is, create your own mystery there? But would you roll the dice there with a Josh Dobbs, Jayden Daniels, and I'll include Jaren Hall type quarterback room for the Vikings in 2024?
I'm not opposed to it. I'm kind of like we talked about with Dobbs. I'm not really willing to commit to any singular thing right now, but the more I see of Jayden Daniels, I think I'm gonna have to take a little bit of an L here because his time at Arizona State stunk, and he's always shown great flashes as a runner, and that's never been an issue. He's always been really good at that, and he's defaulted to that way too often. Last year, he showed a little bit more willingness to stand in the pocket and deliver the football down the field, and this year, look, he's taken a lot bigger steps than I was willing to give him credit for a few weeks ago. And I have to be willing to admit that against my Florida Gators, he made them look like a JV team. And it's not like that Florida defense is void of talent. They have good talent on all 3 levels. They just stink on defense. They're atrocious. They're like the Vikings defense in 2013, the year before Zimmer. Like they can't tackle worth anything. And Jayden Daniels cooked him for, I think it was 364 yards passing, 220 on the ground, and they gained over 700 yards in a 52-35 win. It was just brutal. And Daniels has really shown a lot of growth. He was on pace to beat Alabama before Dallas Truner honestly cheap shotted him in the pocket, and he suffered a concussion and was out for that game. Like, when I look at all these things and how Daniels is now being kind of compared to Lamar Jackson as a runner, which I can completely see, and his growth as a passer, makes me wonder what in the world Herm Edwards was doing with him at Arizona State if we're getting this kind of production under Brian Kelly, who's not exactly what you would call a great developer of quarterbacks in Death Valley. So I'd be comfortable with it, but I want to be able to really dive into more of the all 22 before I give like my official stamp of approval, but he's better than I gave him credit for initially. And I'm willing to admit that.
Yeah, he's been awesome, man. I mean, just dual threat option, throwing for a bunch of yards, running for a bunch of yards. I guess same kind of question to you, Miles. Would you sign up for a Josh Dobbs, Jayden Daniels type of quarterback situation for the Vikings? I guess Dobbs being the stopgap option, and then maybe Jayden Daniels really being your franchise guy. Because it just looks like to me like Kevin O'Connell. I was just so perplexed when Judd was just like obsessing with this fact of like, he wants a running quarterback. He wants a running quarterback. It's like, well, why? well, geez, now in 2 games. Okay, I understand what Judd was saying.
Well, I think to answer that last part about like the running quarterback aspect of things, I think the one thing we've seen with Dobbs is if you're, especially when your receivers get hurt, you got KJ Osborne and JJ both hurt, both out, and you saw some of those guys kind of struggle to get some separation yesterday. Besides CJ Hawkinson, who went roughshot, but like if guys struggle to get open or things just aren't hitting good coverage, sometimes the rushing quarterback can kind of make things right when the coverage is good. And that type of thing is something we didn't have with Kirk. And now that's not to say that like Dobbs is better than Kirk, those types of things. But one thing it does is it just allows you multiple ways out. And I think that's always a big aspect of it. Is it you can't always do it with your arm. It's not always going to be there. Completions aren't always going to be there. But if you can create in multiple ways like that, like the way Dobbs can, or Jayden Daniels can as well, I think that just allows that much more. Now, I think the one thing that would scare you with a Jayden Daniels is he the type of guy that's going to come in and only focus on the running? And because he doesn't understand how to maneuver the pocket that well, like those are the things you always need to like figure out. But to your point with like developing behind a Josh Dobbs, I think Dobbs would be that perfect type of stopgap to like help train a young guy to like learn to read the pocket, learn to move in the pocket, read a defense, and understand that you have your athleticism, but it doesn't need to be like your crutch. It's your backup plan. It's not like not every play needs to be eyes downfield. You see one read, and if it's not there, you take off. Like those are the type of things that can be tough with dual threat quarterbacks at times. But with a Josh Dobbs, I think he's kind of gives you that perfect blend. And so for me, I think it's I'd have no problem with it. It would obviously depend on like where you plan to take a guy like Jayden Daniels, because I think he's obviously made himself some money and made himself a better prospect than he was even a few weeks ago, 6 months ago. So he's the type of guy that maybe he's just a late bloomer. And I think sometimes we don't let guys develop. I think him, Bo Nix, I think some of those guys, Jordan Travis, I think some of those guys, like some of these guys need time. And I think that's okay. I don't think it's like always needs to be a negative. Like Joe Burrow is a perfect example of a guy that like, he would have been probably pretty good at Ohio State, but he wasn't like the best quarterback. We didn't know a lot about him going into his last year at LSU. The year before, he was kind of like a pretty decent quarterback, but he wasn't like someone you expected to be the first overall pick the following year, a Heisman Trophy winner. So not saying Jayden Daniels is going to win the Heisman, but he's made a pretty good case for it. So I think it's just one of those situations that like a Jayden Daniels, maybe he's just a late bloomer. Maybe he just needed like consistency and reps at LSU to kind of get him there. And a guy like Dobbs, like I said before, could be the perfect guy to kind of teach him that dual blend ability.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to watch, like just the phase from Josh Dobbs into a guy like Jayden Daniels, who obviously is still a little bit raw and whatnot and might need a little bit more time. We're seeing CJ Stroud ball out. I mean, that dude he's going to win Rookie of the Year for sure, but he might get MVP votes if he leads this Texans team to the playoffs. I mean, no one saw this coming from him either. So I'm fascinated by it, what they end up doing here, whether that's with keeping Josh Dobbs, whether that's re-signing Kirk, whether that's drafting the franchise guy and plugging him in right away in 2024. I mean, we were joking like 3 or 4 weeks ago going into the Niners game. They're like, all right, they're probably going to lose this game and all bets are off. And what do they do at the draft? And now here we are 3 weeks later and we have egg on our face, but we're also enjoying that egg on our face because this has been a blast to watch. So I find it super fascinating. Boys, I want some analysis here on what the Senior Bowl is going to end up doing here. So I know you guys have gone down there numerous times to Mobile, Alabama to talk about the Senior Bowl, or to cover it and whatnot. But now I believe, and I'm reading this from Adam Schefter, this was from last week, that the NFL sent a memo to all teams informing that all college juniors who declare for the draft will now be eligible to play in the Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, or HBCU Legacy Bowl. Last year, 69 juniors entered the draft but couldn't play in the All-Star game. So, Forno, like how big of a deal is it that juniors can now participate? Is this good for the Senior Bowl? Is this good for draft evaluations? I guess where do you kind of fall on this, and how would you kind of educate our listeners who have kind of no idea what this is?
I don't really know how it's going to turn out. They did move up draft declaration day almost a week to the 9th of January. And then at that point, they can invite juniors to join their rosters. And the one really difficult part for these all-star games is it's a year-round process. They are already sending out invites. You have Kansas State's Cooper Beebe and Ben Sinnott. They've already committed to the Senior Bowl that they will be there in Mobile at the end of January. But now they have no idea what juniors are going to declare, because guys will start declaring already. Tyrese Chambers, wide receiver from Maryland, who's a really interesting speedster, already declared last week. And you're going to see a lot more of that after Thanksgiving, because that's the last weekend of regular season college football. And then after all these bowl games, you're going to start seeing guys declare for the draft. So at that point, then you need to decide, okay, are these guys actually going to be worth bringing to our All-Star game based on what our board currently looks like? So it could end up a few different ways. One way I think it could end up is some guys who weren't necessarily sure if they were going to declare, because they're like, okay, maybe I'm like a second or third round pick, because the committee that they ask for recommendations for the draft gives out 3 grades: first round, second round, go back to school. And if a guy gets a second round grade, like, I don't know, wait, I can go to the Senior Bowl and I can have a full week of practice against these guys and show my stuff. You know what? Maybe that's more appealing. Maybe I will declare. And it's not like the NBA where you can pull back. So I think that could be a factor. I think it could be an absolutely nothing burger. And it could be there where juniors really don't even compete at the All-Star games. I think last year it was 69 juniors declared for the NFL draft. We're not exactly talking like an extremely high number. It's relatively low. So I don't know how this is going to play out. And it honestly could mean absolutely nothing other than you get like maybe 8 juniors to the Senior Bowl. Because like the top guys like Drake May, they're not going to Mobile. They're just going to go to the combine. They may not even throw at the combine. It's the fringe guys that you need to worry about. And then how's this going to affect other players? How's this going to affect guys who are maybe 7th round UDFA grades who now don't get to go to Mobile and show their stuff and could make themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars with a really good week of performance? It's a trickle down effect. I really don't know how it's going to play out, but you may see more talent at these games because the few juniors do get to go. And I think that could be a net positive for the entertainment value. But as far as a scouting perspective, you're going to get data on some of these guys no matter what. It's just whatever medium you end up getting it. And I'm intrigued to see how it plays out.
Miles, are you a fan of this? Do you like that the Senior Bowl and other stuff is getting more juniors into it? Are you against it? I guess I know you've been down there a few times. What have you liked when you had been down there? And do you think that this is a good thing for it going forward?
Well, I think as a junior, like, especially for these all-star teams, like the Senior Bowl, the HBCU Bowl, and then the Shrine Bowl, they're all like Forno said, they're all doing their homework ahead of time because they know who the seniors are. When you don't know, as those all-star games, like, you don't know what junior is going to declare. Like, you can do your homework. You're doing your homework on guys for the future, but like, as you know, because it was only seniors for so long, like, it's really hard to know like who you're going to send invites to. Like, you might send an invite to a junior, but that guy might decide, I'm not going to declare. Well, then, like, that's the tough situation, is like a lot of these guys that do come out, the juniors, it'll be last minute type of ones. And those are probably the guys that are like day three picks. Like, I wouldn't expect like what we've been saying, like Drake May, like those guys, like the top tier. Most juniors or underclassmen that come out in the draft are usually ones that expect to be high round picks. And so, like, why would you then go to an all-star game in those scenarios? But on the other hand, there are some underclassmen that do declare because whether it's money, whether it's other situations that they're looking at of like why they need to go out and go to try to go to the NFL, might lend them a better opportunity to go to an all-star game and maybe raise their stock compared to where it might have been in the pre-draft process when they get kind of their grades when they decide whether they want to declare or not. But yeah, I really don't. I like expanding the talent level. I think that's great, but I don't really see it being like a huge hindrance. And because of when underclassmen have to declare, and then the fact that like you don't know who's declaring and who's not, and in the same vein, like I said, some guys, like most underclassmen, typically tend to be higher round picks, and at that case, like, why decide to go to the any of these all-star games? So it's kind of like I wouldn't expect a lot of them, especially in this first year. I wouldn't expect a lot of underclassmen to go to these all-star games, but maybe as the years go by, they plan it out a little bit more and they can kind of make true decisions and have a little bit more of a period of time where they can make those decisions from the all-star team standpoint and from the the draft prospect standpoint. So right now, I expect it to be like a very few underclassmen in each All-Star game this year, at least.
It also hurts that they can't even be invited till after January 9th.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big thing for these programs, like these All-Star games. They need these rosters relatively finalized. They need the core guys, and they have a max. It's not like, hey, I can just bring in whoever I want. They have a set number that they're allowed to bring. And I think that number's 108. I may be wrong, but if you have only 108 spots, and by the time that time comes around, you have 100 of them filled, and you already have plans for the other 8 spots. You're just waiting on commitments, because the last week there's always a bunch of shuffling because guys drop out and guys don't accept those invites and they bring somebody else in. Like, how many juniors are there going to be? And the fact that they dropped this on everybody in November screws the agents, screws the players, screws the All-Star games, and it could be a chaotic cluster when it comes to the beginning of this draft evaluation process at these All-Star games. And it feels really poorly mismanaged by the NFL, but we know that they want the Shrine Game to be the premier game and not the Senior Bowl, mainly because it's in Mobile. And Mobile, if you've ever tried to get there, only 4 airports fly to Mobile, and it's a pain in the butt to get there. Pretty easy to get to Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, well, and the tough part too is, I think the last part there is with these underclassmen, they're really they're not in a good position to like the one thing the All-Star games don't do is they don't guarantee you like, oh, this will raise your draft stock X amount. Like a lot of these Senior Bowl guys, the seniors, like a lot of them are UDFA late round type guys and are just like trying to show that they can be that. Now these underclassmen, like, where's a little bit more of that incentive for some of these guys as they do decide to come out? So like, because there's no guarantees of anything, and that's the hard part for an underclassman is like, if I'm coming out and I'm getting like a 2nd or 3rd round grade, how is this Senior Bowl or the Shrine really going to propel me to the 1st round? Like or is it going to make it worse for me? Like, that's the tough part as an underclassman compared to a senior, where like there's really not as much to lose, I don't think, as you are if you're an underclassman.
Nice, good stuff here, boys, on Purple Daily on Draft. A lot of good stuff what the Vikings want to do on the defensive side. Jayden Daniels talk. A lot of good stuff here every Monday right here on the Purple Daily YouTube channel. You can hit that subscribe button for daily Vikings entertainment. For Miles Gorham, Tyler Forness, I'm Declan Goff. We'll be back here again Monday afternoon next week to break things down again on Purple Daily on Draft. Stay tuned for Before I Die, too, with Ross, Jesse, and Judd. This is Purple Daily, where we just want to see the Vikings win a Super Bowl before we die.